Welcome to the Pivot Experience podcast, where leadership transformation isn't just a concept, it's a journey we take together. This is where real leaders share real stories about the moments that changed everything. In each episode, we dive deep into the pivotal experiences that transformed good leaders into great ones. Whether you're a seasoned executive, a rising star in your organization, or someone ready to take that next big step in your leadership journey, you're in the right place. Get ready to learn, grow, and maybe even find that spark that ignites your own leadership pivot. This is the Pivot Experience podcast, where your next breakthrough starts here.
Hey guys, what's up? It's your friend, Pastor John R. Adolph from the Antioch Church in Beaumont, Texas. Hey, listen, do me a favor, like, share, and subscribe this channel so you can continue to pivot into your next.
What's up and what's happening, TPE family? We're back with another episode of the Pivot Experience podcast, where our aim and goal is to help leaders pivot into their next. My name is Alex Seal, and for the last 23 years, I've had the joy and pleasure for working for one of the world's most caring companies. And I've started this podcast with the intent of connecting leaders to engaging and compelling stories from other professionals and other leaders in the space to help you pivot into your next. And on today's episode, that is going to be no different. As you guys know, I've been talking to just a host of different people from different spectrums, from different walks of life, and then just different experiences. And today we're going to talk to somebody about the subject of HR. If you're in business, you definitely know that there's human resource related things that we all deal with. And this is someone who I feel like is on the cutting edge of human resources. And I think they have a business, and we'll be able to speak into some of the things that will really help us get across and understand some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that exist in human resources. And I'm talking about on today's show, we have Michelle Griffin. How are you doing today, ma'am?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, no, the pleasure is all ours. And so, I ran across your information here recently, and I just couldn't wait for the opportunity for us to get this interview scheduled. I'm super excited about the content that you're going to bring to the Pivot Experience, our audience here. We have a lot of young leaders, seasoned leaders, everyone from new to old, who are always looking to gain new information from different sectors of business, and you're no different. And so I want to first off ask you, how did you get into the business or the game of human resources?
So I did it intentionally, which typically people fall into it without, any kind of real desire to do the job. They kind of just somehow have some operations or management or, those types of roles that they just kind of get handed HR. I was in auto theft and arson as an investigator for about 6 years. I went back to school to get my master's degree in industrial organizational psychology, which is a research degree of human capital. And while I was in school, I intentionally switched into human resources to align my career with my education. And my first job was at an IT technology company. At that time they had about 300 employees, and I was the second person in HR. A good rule of thumb is to have one HR person for every 100 people. So having two people for 300 was quite an undertaking. I was having to do every single piece of HR. And so it was a lot of trial by file learning. Once I was done with my master's degree, I had been at that company for 1 year. I went ahead and got my HR certification and continued to grow with that company. I became their head of HR after only 2 years of experience, and stayed with that company for a total of about 5.5 years. And then I became a director of HR at a construction company. So I switched industries and had to learn a whole new kind of internal process, culture. And while I was at that company, because they only had about 100 employees and they were only in one state versus the other company, by the time I left, there was 850 employees across 10 states and 4 countries. And I ran HR for all of it. So I went from having a very large responsibility over to not very much. And so I had the capacity to take on more with my education. I started getting my PhD also in IO psychology. And then from there, started my own consulting firm. And so I've had my firm for about 5.5 years now. So I've pretty much decided to kind of keep an entire career path within HR along with my education. So it was something that I did on purpose.
No, I love that. And so I don't want to dwell too much on your past, but you did mention that within a year or 2 years' time, you went from one of the HR leads to the director. And I guess,
Mhm.
I love when I hear those pivots, especially with the time frame that you did it in. And I
Mhm.
guess for the audience, what are some of the things, if you can recall, that you did that you can remember that really pushed your acceleration in that area? Like what are some of those big ideas, not necessarily like innovations, but just the
Mhm.
internal workings of you that you feel like propelled you that quickly?
I had a mentor at the company who gave me a lot of advice on how to deal with the politics of the company. And so that's something that even with anyone trying to climb the corporate ladder, that is a skill you do have to learn. And there was one kind of pivotal moment where I really had to understand how much of myself I had to give to climb the corporate ladder and sacrifice for that. When I was first hired, my desk was right outside of the COO's office, and my mentor was the head of a tech team, and he was kind of off to the other corner, but still kind of nearby. And at one point, he gave me the advice of if the COO is still there, that I should still be there and make sure I was always seen and heard and always available. And I was like, well, I'm in school and I'm trying to, um, you know, better my career that way. And he said, nobody cares. And it made me realize that whatever I have going on in my personal life, whatever I'm trying to do on my own, no one really did care. It was more about what they could see and what they could see as a result of my effort at the business. So from that point forward, regardless of whatever I had going on, I was staying late. And the COO at one point, I think it was a little after 5 on a Friday, and he was like, I can't believe you're still here. And he's like, what are you still doing here? And I told him whatever project I was working on at the time. And I said, well, you're still here. And he's like, well, yeah, I've got this stuff going on too. And there was multiple times where I developed a great rapport with the COO. And with a company of over, at that point, well over 300 people, we were hiring about 5 people a week. So that company was rapidly growing. And so there was obviously the hundreds of employees that COO had never met. And while HR was part of his purview, it wasn't someone I should have had a direct line of sight to. But because of that, as soon as the HR manager became too overwhelmed to continue to take on the responsibilities, she told me that she really didn't want to stay in the role. She wanted to move to payroll. And I told her I was ready to step up. And she said, if you're ready to step up, I'll step down. And so that's how that actually happened. It was like a conversation that happened at the office. It was like 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. And so the very next day, I got a call from the COO that I was promoted and she was being moved to payroll. And that's how I got the job.
Wow, wow, there's a few things, and if you care to just entertain me, that I would like to
Yeah,
unpack about that story, because
of course.
I think there's a lot that can be said, and this is early in your career, right? This is what, okay,
Yeah,
I'm not gonna
I
assign an
was
age to it,
probably,
but
no, no, no. I don't mind. I was probably 30 at the time, maybe 29.
so early in your career, you saw the value of late nights and early mornings. You hear the cliche of working hard, but you actually had some purpose in those late nights. You were open enough to be able to create a relationship with the people who are making the decisions in the organization, the COO. Now, I did have a question. Was this mentor assigned to you, or was this somebody that you just grew to develop a
No, he
relationship with?
was just, yeah, it was just someone that I developed a relationship with. And I thought he was a really great leader. And so there'd be multiple times where, being in HR, I would help with employment relation issues and things like that. So him and his team often came about, people that were coming in late or, calling in sick or, random things like that. So his team was pretty large. So there was usually some kind of need to come to HR on a regular basis. And so since I had already passed a certification, which technically I had two of them. One of them was called, at the time, it was called Assurance of Learning. Now it's called an APHR. But it was a certification you could get at the student level. You didn't need to have the years of experience yet. Once I had the years of experience in the master's, I had to take the test again to get the PHR. And the HR manager didn't have any formal education in HR, and she didn't have an HR certification. So I was probably 10 years younger than her, but very quickly superseded her in her education and knowledge of employment law and HR responsibilities. And so they often would come to me for help and guidance and things like that. So with that, I pretty much would rely on him for career coaching and things like that.
No, I just love that. That's a lot of intentionality on your part to, identify these relationships, being open enough to listen to somebody who's not in your department. Leadership. I always tell people, leadership is leadership. Sometimes people look at what you're doing and say, "Hey, this leadership style or your leadership principles aren't necessarily applicable to what I do because we're doing something different." And you were wise enough to be able to extract knowledge from somebody who's in IT for all of the departments. Usually the IT department is looked at as, those are the computer guys over here and we're over here doing something different. But no, I love the humility that you expressed in this story. To me, it sounded like you were somebody who was a mover and a shaker, but understood that, hey, if I'm going to grow and advance here, I needed to be open and to listen and to learn from somebody else. I'm pretty sure it might have felt like a slap in the face to him for him to hear you say, "Well, I'm in school." And then so what? Who cares? And I'm sure that was even though it sounded like to me you still persevered and got it done, you still understood the need to balance between the two of those and still appeal to what his request was to you as a mentor and still get your studies done. So that's awesome. And then the last thing I'm gonna highlight on this, and we're gonna move forward, I promise. This story is an episode within itself because you recognize the growth. Obviously, as an HR person, I think you're going to be one of the first people to realize, hey, we're hiring at a higher clip because that's a lot of your work. But then you understood that as a rule of thumb, we're already on demand. Opportunity is going to present itself for me to advance here. And unfortunately that opportunity came at the, I don't want to say demise, but like the wearing of a colleague. But just the fact that you were ready and you were apt to be able to jump into that, man, that's an amazing story. It's just hey, being prepared. There's a thing we say in my business is that you stay ready so you don't have to get ready. And it sounded like to me you were always ready for the next call. And so I want to fast forward a little bit into your current line of work. And you mentioned that you were in your consultancy. I want to say, did you maybe form this consultancy during the time of COVID? Maybe was that a little bit before or during?
It was slightly before/during. So I was a second year in my PhD. It took me 5.5 years to do my doctorate. And I technically went to the company I was at right around May and told them that I was getting my doctorate, and we worked out an exit strategy starting in July, and I had a 90-day exit strategy to replace myself, train that person. I got my full salary the whole time. I also got a bonus for staying through that process. I really owe a lot to that business owner that understood what it took to start a business and to really launch yourself. I was allowed to come and go as I needed to take on sales calls and I did a lot of calls with other consultants and coaches and HR professionals to find out, essentially a lot of market research and kind of what's the going rate, what's the market like, and what's their target audience? Did they have employees or contractors? Why or why not? Things like that. So I did about 3 months of market research during that same 3-month process for that exit. And I ended up getting my first client by October 1st of 2019, which my last day as an employee was September 30th. So I didn't actually have like a gap in employment, which was really nice. And so by December, I had my second client, and by January, I had 8 clients. And rather than turn away work and stay a solopreneur, I decided to hire employees. So I hired a team member in early January and by February. And so technically, I wasn't actually the first person on payroll. I set up the entity at the very end of December as a true LLC. And rather than, being a solopreneur, entrepreneur kind of thing with that, with like just using my social security number. So for a couple months, that's as I was kind of figuring out the business structure. And then by end of January is when we had onboarded more clients. There was a total of 8 clients and 2 other full-time employees with myself. And when we started to get questions about people getting sick, we started noticing other countries were going on lockdown. I want to say we started getting positive COVID tests in the US right around that same timeline, but there wasn't a true lockdown yet. So we were starting to get a lot of questions from clients, realizing they're going to need HR help for some of these things that they really didn't need to rely on HR before. So a lot of companies that had never had HR were coming out of the woodworks and asking for the demand of HR. So COVID actually helped us in developing the company, because by the time things actually went in lockdown in March, April timeline, is when we had a lot of companies realizing that they did not know how to manage the leave. They didn't know how to manage people being sick and working remote, and how to manage the type of, I would say, workload that people needed to actually manage, and also performance management from a remote standpoint. So there was just, even people, if they weren't sick, they still had performance, issues and things like that too, until they could figure out what to do. And it was in lockdown for so long that, we continued to grow the business. So I've actually always been profitable. So I'll give you like a quick overview of how fast the company grew. That first year in 2020, we did about 175,000 in revenue. Year 2, so in 2021, we little more than doubled and did about 550,000. Year 3, we did 1.2 million. And then the following year, we stayed around the same size on purpose. We did about 1.5 million. And last year we did almost 2. We did just over 1.8 and almost 1.9. So once I got to $1 million in revenue is when I purposely didn't continue to double or grow as fast. I was trying to put a lot of infrastructure in place. We needed to make sure our communication with our team members was secure. I was putting a leadership team in place and things of that. So I had to strategically restructure the business so I could, scale it again and continue to have a growth pattern to 3 million and 5 million as our next stages. So those were I had to, learn to become a business owner of a, different size company at that point, but pretty quickly I had to learn what all that meant. So
Yeah, typically
it was very quick, but yes, essentially it was created in COVID, but COVID coming out of that was the way that we built the business.
No, I definitely, can see, the high demand of COVID, and then those stressors of all the different questions that would come from this thing that we have no idea how it's impacting, what we're doing. And so I love I gotta, take my hat off to you. Number one, for growing such a successful business, to be able to come out the gate with that level of revenue. Of course, you have the education. Of course, you got the experience, and fortunately, you were given the opportunity from your previous employer to be able to do a lot of things, and they still pay you. There's not a lot of employers do that, but you obviously you've developed a rapport and probably hung on to some of those things that your mentor was teaching you in the beginning, and kind of woven those things into how you were interacting then, to be able to gain that knowledge and that information while you were walking out of the door. So kudos to you for that. But then also having the wherewithal to realize that, hey, I might not have every system in place that I would like to have in place to go to the next level. Sometimes entrepreneurs get too hungry too fast, and they grow, and you hear about these stories of growth, and then you really don't know what that threshold of growth of that your business is outpacing and outperforming your systems and outperforming you as the owner of the business. And so I want to really highlight the fact that you definitely that you did that. So kudos to you. In your, I guess, as the business has started to evolve, would you maybe speak into, and I think you touched on some of this before, but maybe can you go a little bit deeper? What are some of the HR related challenges that you saw in the beginning of the business, and how do you see those same challenges either playing out now, or what are some of the different challenges that exist in the HR environment?
Same kind of things I see or saw in my own company. I see in similar size clients, and so now I have we have different lines of businesses and things now, but in the majority of what we do, we have about 40, little over 40 team members now, and the once you get past around 10, you don't have a network to hire from anymore. You have to do, I would say, traditional recruiting techniques, and there's a lot of issues with that, because when you are essentially wanting to recruit strangers, you're competing with bigger companies, you're competing with companies with benefits, and maybe richer time off policies. And so a lot of small businesses struggle with competing with big businesses for good talent. And so we had the same problems. We had to make sure we were paying for benefits. We started that probably year two. Even our own team members, which at that point we were still hiring our friends, we were hiring people in the industry that we knew and trusted. And even they were saying, I need these things, or I'm going to have to go find a job that provides them. And so that's where we had to make sure that we were starting to offer those things. And we see that in our clients too, as they're growing and we're helping them grow from an HR perspective or an operations support side of things. And the other issue that comes with hiring, strangers, is keeping your culture the way that you intend it to. So from a business owner perspective, there's the intention of your mission and your vision, and you, a lot of times, especially the bigger you get, once you get to especially 25 or 30, there's going to be times when the owner is not always involved in the hiring process and the selection process, and that becomes an issue with relying on your line managers to do your hiring and promoting your culture. And if you have a manager that's toxic that you don't know about, or you tolerate a toxic manager, and things like that, then you end up with a culture that you didn't intend. And then obviously you may have turnover, and that's always really expensive. So there's certain things to watch out for the bigger you get, and the more intentional you have to be. You do have to make some tough decisions in your management structure and the type of employees. The IO psych side of me kind of comes into this point of it, because that's what my expertise is in, and that's something that I tried to stay pretty intentional. We do use assessments when it comes to kind of bringing in a piece of science. So we're not always trying to just say, oh, we have a gut feeling about this person. We try to use assessments. So there's a little bit of a couple of hurdles that we put people through, and then we'll kind of try to work with our clients to pick some good assessment tools or recruiting techniques that fit for their culture. But those are some of the growth side from the human perspective. There's especially in a remote environment, my entire structure is remote. I have team members now that have been with me for 3 years and 4 years that I've never met in person. We just, it's not like we're going to blow a bunch of money on flying a bunch of people to a location, and we'd rather pay good salaries and things like that than, pay a bunch of money to have a retreat or something like that. Or some companies really do have the profit margins to do that. We don't. We try to keep our prices low for our clients, and we try to pay, the salaries that we can. So those are more of a priority than having a bunch of money to afford some of those things. That's why there's some team members I've never met, and because we would, rather try to, pay them and rather than fly them somewhere if we can help it. So there's things like that. I've got a couple team members that a client will fly them somewhere and that kind of thing. So if it happens to work out that I can meet them that way, we'll do it. But so it's interesting when it comes to hiring people and working with people, and even if it is completely remote, but you still have to be intentional about your treatment of your people and your culture.
Oh, so I would say there's a couple of things I want to address in that response. Number one, maintaining culture in a remote environment has to be difficult. Because you don't have the you can't rely on that one-on-one to be able to sense and feel real emotion. I mean, you can gather as much emotion as you can from the person sitting in front of you on a Zoom, but it's nothing like that in-person interaction. So first thing, what are some of those hurdles that you've experienced in your own business or some other businesses that you may have helped that are completely remote and building like culture from a remote standpoint?
I think the one thing that people tend to miss the most is the one thing employers never want to pay for, which is the water cooler talk. So, people necessarily they're not productively working, but they are getting some coffee or, just kind of chit chatting across a cubicle wall or something like that. Maybe they are productive and they're collaborating and they just want to bounce ideas off each other and stuff like that. So there's been a couple times where we, make sure to have team meetings. So people that are involved in helping each other, they all know each other. A lot of times they may not even meet another person in the company until they need to. And they might work on a client together and might be the first time they've met each other and they've, been with the company for quite a while. So we tend to try to make sure that people, take the time to meet and get to know each other. We also, when I'm in meetings with my team members, I'll usually try to have some time in the meeting just to, kind of have that, coffee table talk about how things are going in their life, what's going on personally. I never want to be surprised if someone is making the decision to leave or if they are unhappy in their role. I have been caught off guard. I'm not going to say like people are like that wide open about their lives, but if they want a space to come and talk about what their work-life balance needs to look like, if that is going to shift and change as their children get older, or something might happen in their life, someone's getting sick, they're caring for an ill parent or spouse, or children, things like that. We want to know about that so that we can support them. We're prepared to make sure that they can take time off and their work isn't going to be disrupted. We can pass it off and make sure we're cross training and things like that. So we've tried to be very proactive about, not letting people work in a bubble or in isolation without too much, collaboration with others. And so that's, for us, we've really tried to, make sure that managers are meeting with people on a regular basis, like weekly, and they're very aware of what's going on in their lives. And usually most of the time I get to, know what's going on with that through the managers and things like that. And every once in a while I kind of pop back into like meetings or see people that are lower that I don't usually get to meet and see. And so it's always been really important to me to make people feel important, to make people feel like they're part of a team. I really don't like it when I, hear people, especially usually from other companies or something like that, when they're like, oh, you're just a number. The company can go on without you. They'll just replace you. People shouldn't feel that way. I know a lot of them do. But we try to help especially working with companies. It's important to us to work with companies that don't want those kinds of culture and, want to actively make it a better place to work. And so those are some of the things that it all comes down to genuinely caring and then, making sure that you're supporting them, whether it be through programs, through employee assistance programs or any, additional time off or however you can support them or financially paid time off, things like that. Those are always really important, but, making sure people feel like people. is, something that you just have to be intentional about. You genuinely have to care.
I love that. The water cooler talk. There's a book you may have heard of it, Principles by Ray Dalio. And one of the and most important people things he discussed, and the people who have heard this podcast know I talk about this. Hey, he referenced this as the sabbatical. He said the most important piece of the work environment, work culture, is the time that you get to the time you spend with your team that's away from the work. That's not, that doesn't involve the work. It gets us down to a human level, to really understand, what challenges are we dealing with, what good things are going on in our lives. And so I absolutely love that you brought that to the surface, because it is truly important. Now, you also mentioned, not in this response, but in the previous response, and how you lean into assessments, getting into some of the science of the people that you're working with. And I guess I want to know, what are some of your favorite assessments to use and why?
Um, I have a couple of go-tos. One is predictive index. Another is DISC. So, and we use them for different reasons. And there's others out there that I would say these are easier. So, predictive index we like to use, especially in recruiting, because of the type of platform that it's been built on. It's unlimited assessments, and they're very easy. The behavioral is easy to take. It doesn't take a lot of time, and it is accurate. So it does have it passes a lot of validity tests. I didn't I think it lacks something called face validity, which means it doesn't measure what it looks like it measures, but it actually does, and it is very valid. So I actually wrote a research paper on it when I was still in coursework, and compared predictive index to, I believe, to DISC. And so I wanted to kind of understand the differences and pros and cons between them. So I was really surprised in a lot of the research that I had to pull up on it, that it does measure in levels that are pretty valid for, depending on the level of the character that you're looking at, between 18 months and like 20 months is kind of, so it's good for, a couple of years. People don't tend to change that dramatically unless something, career shift happens, something happens in their lives. Education is another one. So if you get a master's degree or higher education, that can tend to shift your critical thinking skills and things like that might shift. But for the most part, they can stay valid a little longer than that too. So those are really good, and we like using it because of the financial side of it with our clients, because it's we can resell it. We can also assist with using the platform, and we can provide information. We can provide the use of our platform, so we can kind of just support them with different financial levels depending on how much they're wanting to invest. But regardless, it's unlimited amount of assessments, which is not usually the case when it comes to paying per assessment. DISC is one of those things we have to pay per assessment. It is a very long exam. It does take, or assessment, it does take like 45 minutes. You do get a very large book about yourself. You can compare communication styles. It's meant more to be a building tool, an understanding of different communication styles, versus predictive index is literally designed to be predictive. Are you going to be able to perform the job you're being hired to do? DISC is not valid for that measurement. It's not designed to measure someone's ability to perform a job. So if you're going to look at comparing a team environment and how well they're performing their jobs, in an entire team, then you can use predictive index. But if you're wanting to get past some communication struggles, communication styles, preferences, and things like that, then using something like DISC and then being able to compare people in a department and team environment is usually good for different things. So different things for different reasons. Those are the two go-tos that we have.
Love that. Love that. Thank you so much for sharing. So, in one of my final questions, and so this, do you have one more question, and then we're going to do a bit of an activity, if you don't mind and indulging with me. I like to
Sure.
do this segment at the end, but last question: if I am a young aspiring HR professional and I've decided to be intentional about my HR career, and I've stumbled across you and I want to follow in your footsteps, can you give me your top 3 things or pieces of advice that you would give me to become the next Michelle Griffin?
One, an HR certification, because those can be more valuable than a degree, unless your company is a degree snob. But you do have to take continuing education, and so keeping up with that can force you to stay on top of the changes in the laws. The next piece of advice would be try not to say no to leaders. Owners, if they are wanting to do something and you know it's against the law, outright saying, no, you can't do that. I was told that early in my career. I was actually at a conference the day that I got the call from the CEO saying I was being promoted. And that was the piece of advice that I got from actually one of the speakers was don't say no. Find a way to make it happen for them, find out what they're trying to do, and find a way to make it legal. And so always try to work within that gray area or work with employment law attorneys to make sure that you're able to do that. And so one of the first things I did was get the company to partner with an employment law firm so that I had the resources I could go to make that happen for myself and for the company. The a quick example of that is when I was at the IT company, they had good intentions. But essentially what the owner asked for was to give a salaried employee overtime. And because they were asking them to work on a really big project that was going to make them work long hours, and they wanted to give them overtime. And you legally cannot give a salaried person overtime for multiple reasons, but essentially it's not what a salaried person is designed to do. You can actually lose their exemption status if you treat an exempt person like a non-exempt. And then you permanently have misclassified them. So you really don't want to get outside of their proper classification. So once I learned what he was trying to do, we basically came up with an idea of how much the work would be, what would be the equivalent of an overtime rate, and gave them a bonus. And obviously that's legal. And so we could never call it overtime. We could never call it anything that had to do with that. We literally called it a project bonus, added that as a payroll code, and gave them what they wanted. And that obviously worked out. So not saying no, and if I were to tell the owner, no, you can't do that, but find out a little more. They're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to make things better for the employee, but making things that work out legally for everybody. The last thing, I might actually think a little bit about that one. I would say, obviously, believing in yourself and I would say confidence go a long way. And that's kind of also comes in with playing politics, being able to read a room, know when to speak and when not to speak, and being able to kind of be something that the company is looking for when it comes to HR. A lot of times, there's a area where the HR is really needed and people see that. And then there's other times companies will look at it as a necessary evil and they may not respect the position of HR, but it really just how you show up and how you interact with people is going to change your career trajectory.
No, I love all 3 of those things. I think learning how to read the room is so critical for the advancement, and then not just the advancement, but like getting in good with your superiors. Knowing when to say certain things, knowing those nonverbal cues that are so important. And I was gonna say bonus, but I don't have a certification, so I didn't want to blurt out the wrong thing. I was like, well, maybe that sounds like maybe, but I was just like, hey, I'm gonna let the professional answer that question. But no, thank you so much for that. And I'm Michelle. I've enjoyed this time. I'm sure the people who are listening enjoyed this time, and we're on our final segment. And I like to do a little thing I call tug of war, where I'm going to give you 2 words that seemingly that you cannot not have one or the other, but you have to pick one, and you have to tell us why you chose one over the other. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay. So your first set of words, and I feel like, well, you know what? I usually try to pick what the guest is going to say based on our conversation, but I'm always surprised at these. And so your words are empathy or accountability?
Oh gosh, I was expecting them to be so like similar. E- Empathy.
Okay.
I'll
Why
choose
you
empathy.
chose empathy?
Um, I So I was thinking of like if someone isn't being accountable, is it better to try to force them or hold them to accountable measures, or is it better to be empathetic and try to find out more about their situation that might be unique to them? And I would take the approach of empathy. So if someone is not performing, I might find out a little more on why and see if it's something that is preventing them from showing up fully, and if there's something we can do to support them and help them get there, so I guess carrot versus stick, I guess, is how I might look at that and say I would rather kind of figure out more of the carrot scenario than force someone to be accountable or what I think should be accountable for them, and try to make sure that they're in the right role. So right person, right role as well, maybe.
No, perfect. I love that answer. I love that answer. Don't worry. Relax. This is just
No, it's
you.
just like that one was a tricky one.
All right. Well, here's another one. Innovation or consistency?
Innovation.
Okay. Explain.
I
As the
I
as the
really don't
HR
like.
person, as the HR person, you I would expect consistency would be, the deal, but this might be the business owner, the entrepreneur talking here.
Yeah, that's probably much more. I spend half my day is spent being innovative. I we have a between my husband and I, we actually have 5 companies, and one of them has about 20 employees in it that does nothing but support us. Either like my executive assistant, my husband's executive assistant, for example, but also we have a huge development team, and we do own our own proprietary software, and then we license software as well. And so we have specific developers for Power BI, Smart Sheets, our CRM. Um, we have our own applicant tracking system. And so, literally, the first 3 hours of my day is spent in either a half hour or hour back to back meetings, meeting with different people on these teams, working in different projects. SharePoint is another one. We have 2 developers for SharePoint. Then we also have our own IT staff for security and different things that we need to plug and play for our own security and things like that for IT support. So anyway, all of those different meetings all happen as like a complete half of my day every day. And so I really don't like it when someone says, why do you have this process in place? Why do you do it that way? And the only answer is, I don't know. It's always been done that way. So being innovative and saying, kind of being, need to be able to pivot and change and move quickly, especially in the technology space. HR is one of those where people are thinking, they're not really sure if technology can replace HR, and it may be one of those things where chat gpt and different AI bots surprise us, and I really didn't expect it to infiltrate digital marketing as much as it has, or even the medical field as much as it has. It really started in areas people didn't expect. So it's some of those things where we're teaching our team members different technologies. We're always investigating new technology and upgrades that companies are making so that we can, provide good solutions to our clients. And our clients vary in size so much that we have some that have, 2 employees, and we need to know the technology that can support really small companies. A lot of companies don't focus on small business support, and that's a big target of what we focus on. So it's kind of like innovate or die at this point.
No, I love that. No, I that in my working genius, the innovation is one of my top drivers, and so I definitely I read that resonates with me very well. All right, we got 2 more sets. Okay, you still with me? Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Clear expectations or freedom?
I want to answer both almost, and I'll explain why. So I give people a lot of freedom. But with that comes expectation. So maybe it's freedom first, but you can't give people, rope and then let them hang themselves. So what I tend to like to do with my team members is I do not have business hours. They can work whenever they are available to work, and that might be, while their kids are in school. It could be, after their kids are already in bed. It's whenever it makes sense for them. And so because of that, they have a lot of freedom. But there's also the expectation of getting your work done. If you're going to set a meeting with a client, attend that meeting. And we have had to let people go that couldn't meet those expectations around their own freedom, which blew my mind. We had someone who literally set a meeting, their own meeting, they set it with the client, and then didn't show to the meeting. And when we approached them about it, they said they forgot about it and decided to go out and get a coffee. And I was like, but it was your meeting. And so, we kind of learned that, remote work and isn't for everyone. You do have to be, kind of a self-starter and self-disciplined to do that. So with that, you do have to meet a lot of expectations, but I prefer to give people the freedom to be adults and work with, hopefully they have the work ethic to do that.
No, that's a perfect answer. This is the first time we've allowed a dual answer. We usually try to pin them into one, but we'll accept that on today's. No, that's an awesome answer. And here's our last set of words. Hopefully this one is easy sailing for you. Results or relationships?
Well, that depends on the context. I'll go with results. And hopefully relationships will follow. But there's also, it comes with trust too. And so if I expect results, and so if someone is not producing results because they're not living up to the expectations, there's a lot of trust that comes with, especially delegating. If you're going to delegate something, I don't like to micromanage and follow up. And if I do follow up and I've asked you about it, don't lie to me. I've had that happen when I was an HR manager. I had an admin, and I'm not good at being a manager to admins, because I would usually say something once, expect that you understood that, and you're going to produce the results from that. If I do follow up with you and say, how are you working on that? Do you need anything? Do you need help from anything? And there was an admin that always told me he was fine. And it was filing paperwork. And I was like, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of paperwork. And I was like, did you take the time to go file everything? It's filing room. Go put on headphones. I used to have to do it when I was starting at the company. And I was like, just, take off some half day time basically and just go lock yourself in the closet and go file everything. And he said he was fine and was doing everything. Then he left the company to go to grad school. So we, helped him leave the company and everything. And then when we left, we found tons and tons of paper squirreled away in his desk. And when we stacked up the papers, it was over 5 feet tall. And we had to hire an admin just to come in. We hired a temp just to come in to file paperwork. And I was so upset because I was like, what else could I have done other than physically go look in his desk or physically go, get into his own personal space and figure out if he was actually doing what he said he was doing. And he was, essentially not being honest. So yeah, ever since then, I have tried to be a little more focused on results. I think I got a little burned on that one because I would give people give people a lot of freedom. But yeah, that one made me be like, okay, that's great, but where are the results?
No. Well, I want to say thank you so much for participating in this segment. Hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I did. And that concludes today's episode. Michelle, I want to say just thank you for all the nuggets of not only HR wisdom, but how to grow and develop a business and what it really takes from an individual standpoint. And I truly believe that, I know we were talking to that HR professional, but I think we were talking to business leaders as a whole, and entrepreneurs as a whole. Like, I think if you're listening to Michelle's story, I think that, and I don't hope I'm not being disrespectful, not saying Dr. Michelle, but we're listening to
No, it's fine. If you did, I would say call me Michelle anyway.
Listening to Michelle's story, and it should inspire you to action. And she gave a bunch of actionable things that don't cost you nothing. Now, she did mention the certification. She did mention the continuing the education, but there's something that you can do on the inside. Finding somebody that you look up to in the business that has great skills, staying later, building a rapport. Some of us downplay building a rapport, but building a rapport with the right people to seize the moments as they come about. So thank you so much for giving us all of that that wealth of knowledge that you have. And if people want to interact with you or connect with you for HR consulting, how do they go about doing that?
Best way is through our website, which is griffin-resources.com. And all my direct contact information is on there, along with all of our services and reaching out to our sales admin and things like that as well. So it's pretty easy to dig through our website and contact us.
Well, I will say, TPE family, I think we have another excellent story on how to not only lead a successful business, but to also lead yourself. Again, thank you so much, Michelle, for your time. And to TPE family, please remember, like, share, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us continue to get this message out to as many people as possible. And also, if you can, do me a favor and rate this podcast, give us 5 stars, or if you feel like we're worth it, and leave a comment, why don't you? That'll really help us out as well. And until next time, TPE family, peace.
Hey guys, what's up? It's your friend, Pastor John R. Adolph from the Antioch Church in Beaumont, Texas. And I just want to slip this in right quick so you'll never forget. It's all about progress over perfection here at TPE.
Tap into the Pivot Experience, where we help young, hungry entrepreneurs move on to the next step.